When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Goblins at Rereads channel. Today's video we're going to be doing Jon 3, A Clash of Kings. It is a long one, so get some snacks and hopefully you enjoy the chapter. Two really long chapters right back to back with Catelyn 2 and Jon 3. I will say for my Game of Thrones rereaders that are currently watching that series, I haven't been able to get those up the last couple days. I've been really busy with trying to get through school and my midterms, and also I've been having some issues with YouTube not letting me download my videos off of my channel as those videos are privated now on my main channel. So those will start daily uploading once again when I'm able to get that figured out. But for now, maybe won't be as many of those until that's fixed, which might be fixed by the time you're watching this video. But let's get into Jon 3, A Clash of Kings, starting on page 267. Jon rides through a heavy rainstorm, struggling against the elements as he crosses a swollen stream. Lord Commander Mormont pulls his hood tighter and curses the weather, while his raven, soaked and grumpy, sits on his shoulder. The weather has not improved since they've gotten further north. The last time we saw Jon, they were in the village of White Tree. There was nobody there. There haven't been really any sightings of life until they get to Craster's Keep, which they're approaching in this chapter. All of this is very ominous as we're leading to, the Craster. Why is he the only person that's still living in this area? Where is everybody else gone, and what is the reason behind that? The wind sends wet leaves flying around them, which Jon likens to a flock of dead birds. It's very interesting when you think about some of these birds are probably being mind-controlled by Brynden Rivers, by the Three-Eyed Crow. A lot of them almost are dead birds. They're not really living in their own capacity. They're being controlled by others. So that's another interesting part of this chapter, but you also liken it to how the others are able to control dead animals like spiders, for instance, or horses. A lot of interesting foreshadowing to that bit of a line. Jon reflects on the miserable conditions, thinking the haunted forest feels more like a drowned forest, given how much it's been, raining, snowing, all that type of stuff. He worries about Sam, who is a poor rider and would struggle with the treacherous, muddy terrain after 6 days of rain. Well, Sam is just not really good at anything. When you think about going north of the wall, he's good with reading, he's good with maps, but going on this grand of adventure, the things you're going to be facing, the bitter cold, the elements, it's not the best place and situation for Samwell Tarly. He imagines life back at Castle Black, where some of his friends still were, like Pip and Toad, who were likely enjoying the warmth of the common room with mulled wine. Jon, when he first signed up for this mission, maybe didn't think about it as being as bad as it is, but now when you've lost even the small pleasantries that you have at Castle Black, you really start to miss them. Jon physically is exhausted, burdened by wet wool, aching muscles, and a diet of salt cod, salt beef, and hard cheese. Not only is this journey very taxing in terms of the elements and the cold and the rain and all that stuff, you have to remember these are men that are equipped with a lot of heavy, armor and bundles and all the sorts of things you need to survive. Also, they're sleeping on the ground most nights or in some sort of a bedroll. It's not the most nice thing to be having to sleep on the ground. I've personally gone camping where I basically slept on the ground. It was not a great experience, and I can only imagine how they did it back in the day. A hunting horn sounds in the distance, partially drowned out by the rain. Mormont identifies it as Buckwell's horn and expresses relief that Craster is still there. The raven flips its wings and croaks corn and ruffles its feathers again. And this really paints the idea of when we connect back to the end of the chapter when Mormont and Jon discuss Craster, think about what we just built up to with this first page that George talks about. How Jon and their whole party, the morale is very low. Their living conditions right now are really bad. They are tired. They're hungry. It's not going well for them. So when you do have even a bit of respite, you think about Craster, you at least are going to be under a roof, or at least some of the men will be. You'll have at least some decent food, better than what they've been eating even recently. Now, some of them, again, not a lot of these men will get this luxury, but the men that are, sleeping in Craster's Keep will get some of those luxuries that they are not experiencing here. And so that's when you think about, if you're a smaller party of rangers, Craster's not the most likable person, of course, but when you're north of the wall, there's not many places that you can find a nice dry roof to sleep under and maybe even get fed a little bit. And so that's why Craster, for one, on the Night's Watch side of things, has been able to live for so long or not be arrested or any of those things. And you think about on the other side of it, the others, well, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And the wildlings also have no real reason to kind of kill Craster at this point. So Craster's made himself quite valuable, even though he's quite repulsive. I know I have a lot of fans that like Craster. He is not a good guy, that's all I'm going to say. As we get into page 268, Jon recalls hearing stories from the Night's Watch about Craster and his keep and is eager to finally see it. It's kind of been played up a little bit more than what it is, right? Craster's keep is not a keep at all. It's basically like one little house, and that's about it. There's not much defenses to it. It's not a true keep. After encountering 7 abandoned villages, the group had feared Craster's keep would also be deserted, but signs suggested otherwise. Craster had stayed, but why? And that's the real question that many of these men will have. Jon hopes that Lord Commander Mormont will get some answers and that they will finally have shelter from the rain. Unfortunately, Craster's keep's not that big. It's not going to be able to house all these men. Some of them, of course, will, but Mormont will get some answers at least. Now, I've talked about this already a lot in this book. I think Mormont's journey north is very foolish. I think it's dumb. I know you can say with hindsight because we know what results of this journey north, but it just doesn't make any sense. All the warning signs are telling you that the wildlings are amassing in numbers and they're scared of something outside of the Night's Watch, and you've already been attacked by the others in book 1. You know they are a thing, and you know that could be very easily driving the wildlings south. So what is there to really gain going north? Oh, that Mance Rayder is gathering an army, and to do what? Well, once you know that information, Craster all but tells them what's going on, right? Mance is gathering an army, and if he's gathering an army, it's going to be coming south. That's all you really need. And so I even think like after this chapter, Mormont should have headed back. He has the information that he needs to know, right? And you might be thinking, well, he doesn't know everything about the others' threat. He doesn't know about everything about Benjen. Okay, but if the others are this big threat that we think that they are, and the Night's Watch have built them up to be, going out into their environment, going out into where they have the advantage, makes no sense. And so, yeah, I have a lot of issues with what Jeor Mormont does with the Night's Watch and his leadership of the Wall, but we'll kind of explore that more as the story for Jon goes on in this book. Thorin Smallwood reassures Mormont that Craster, despite his unsavory reputation, is a friend to the Watch and opposes Mance Rayder. There's a lot of reasons for this. Again, I don't think that Craster is necessarily a friend of the Watch. I would say more that Craster is able to gain things that he wants from the Watch. In terms of Craster getting things like wine and weapons, and he'll give them information, right? He's kind of like a spy. He's almost a double agent, in my opinion, is kind of what he is. Dywin, however, on the opposite side of this, describes Craster as a kinslayer, a liar, an R-word. Again, not going to say that on YouTube because YouTube doesn't like that very much, a craven, and possibly involved in trafficking with slavers and demons. A lot of these, if not all of them, are true, especially the demons part, which will be a main emphasis of this chapter. Mormont instructs Jon to ride back along the column to spread the word and remind the officers that no trouble should arise over Craster's wives. Even though the Night's Watch is sworn not to, get with women, well, they're still men, and so Mormont cautiously puts that out. Jon turns back and appreciates having the rain out of his face for a short while. As he rides past the column, he sees the exhausted men marching through the rain, appearing as though they were weeping. And this is one thing I want to point out. I know we're not at that point yet where we get to Jeor Mormont and how people turn against him. A lot of this is why, right? These men are trudging through the north. They're struggling. And when you get to even a more desperate situation, when we get to, the Fist of the First Men and even their return journey, this is going to be all in the back of their minds the whole time, is that why are we going on this journey? And why are we all being killed off, starved? It's something that, again, George is building this up from the very beginning of their journey. It's not something that kind of just pops up, towards maybe the end of A Clash of Kings or even into A Storm of Swords. It's something that happens even now. It's people questioning, I would say, Jeor Mormont's leadership. Now, they're not at that point yet, but they will be. And that's something that's interesting to study here, not later on. Jon encounters Samwell Tarly, who is slumped in his saddle, struggling with the wet conditions while leading the baggage train's dray horses. The ravens in their cages squawk and flutter in protest against the rain, prompting Jon to joke about Sam putting a fox in with them. Sam, drenched and miserable, replies that the birds simply hate the rain as much as the men do. Which, yeah, can't blame the birds. They're also being caged and rained on. Not necessarily a good time for the birds. Jon reassures Sam that they are nearing Craster's keep, and hopefully they will be allowed to rest by his fire. Something else I want to note with the actual birds, we see that the birds have a distinct reaction to sightings with the others, or moments in which it seems like the three-eyed crow or Bloodraven is manipulating the birds. Is this a moment where the birds are trying to warn Jon? Are they trying to warn Samwell of what's going on here? Of this, idea of Craster sacrificing babies or animals to the others, and that they're getting close to the others. That's something that I think I haven't really thought about. I didn't even think about it when I was doing the notes for this video, but as I was talking about it, something that maybe came to mind, maybe because I have pictures of the show and some of the things that they brought to the table. I wonder, what do you guys think? Like, is there more to read into with the behavior of the animals of the ravens? Something that George likes to put a lot of emphasis on is how animals are reacting to things. You think about, for instance, Greywind with Robb before the Red Wedding. Bit different because Greywind is a much more intelligent animal, you would assume, than these just random ravens, but it's something I think fruit for thought to keep in the back of your mind, given what we know what happens later on. Sam expresses doubt, recounting Dolores Ed and Tywin's warnings about Craster's savage nature, his practice of marrying his daughters, and rumors of his black blood, which is completely true. Sam is right to be a bit fearful. This is not a man that you want to stay under his house, right? You don't want to have this person be your host, right? It's the same idea of Walder Frey, for instance. You don't want to sleep at the twins, for instance. Same idea of Craster's keep. Now, there's a very distinct power difference. Craster is one man. Walder Frey, very different, has a ton of, family members, has a ton of swords, a ton of influence and wealth. Not really the same here for Craster. Craster is basically banking on the idea that the Watch need him and cannot harm him. Sam hesitates before saying bastard, but Jon laughs it off, acknowledging the word doesn't bother him. Now, this is something that I disagree with. I think that Jon isn't bothered by it because Sam is saying it. I think that in a lot of ways, Jon has come to accept a lot more of who he is. And so, yes, he has, grown thicker skin. He's kind of taken some of Tyrion's advice back in book 1. But at the same time, I think that Jon knows that Sam is not, saying that with ill intent, right? He's not trying to put Jon down. It's just things that have been put into his head by, maybe his father or his family members, or even Westerosi culture as a whole. They don't look at bastards all that well. Jon then rides off to find Sir Otton, reminding Sam to be cautious about Craster's women, though he knows Sam hardly needs the warning. Well, maybe Jon should have warned him a little harder, because Sam would surprise us all in terms of Craster's wives. He assures Sam they will talk again after making camp, and that gets us into page 269. Getting into page 269, Jon carries Mormont's message back to Sir Otton Wythers, who is struggling with the rain and exhaustion. Sir Otton, a small and weary man, welcomes the news, complaining that even his saddle sores have saddle sores. On his way back, Jon takes a shortcut through the dense woods, leaving behind the sounds of men and horses, looking for Ghost, and also I would say probably just taking a break. His social battery might be exhausted. Maybe he just wants a little bit of alone time. The forest is dark and wet, with towering oaks and ironwoods forming a partial canopy that briefly shields him from the rain. As he rides past a lightning-blasted chestnut tree overgrown with wild white roses, he hears rustling in the underbrush. Jon expects this to be Ghosted, of course, but instead it was someone else. Tywin and Gren emerge on horseback. Tywin, one of the Night's Watch scouts, jokes, thought they had an other to deal with. Jon explains the Ghost is off hunting, but will return when they make camp. Tywin jokes that in this weather, Ghost might as well be fishing instead. And the thing that is going to be very worrisome is not only are they not finding any people, right? They're not finding wildlings. They're not finding anyone, really. They're also not finding animals. Ghost, who is usually a pretty good hunter, is not finding anything. Even Ghost is starting to go hungry, looking for food. It really shows that not only is this, haunted forest not having any people in it, there's no animals. There's no sign of life outside of Craster. That is very worrisome if you're the Night's Watch. Gren optimistically recalls that his mother said rain was good for crops, but Tywin counters that it only grows mildew. Again, that's nice and all, right? That the rain helps you grow crops and things like that, but that's not going to help you now, right? You need the rain to stop, especially on a journey like this. Jon informs them that Buckwell has found Craster's keep, and Tywin laughs and warns Jon and Gren not to meddle with Craster's wives. Jon teases Tywin, asking if he wants them for himself, to which Tywin makes a crude joke about Craster only being able to count to 11, with his 10 fingers and 1 cock. Gren, curious, asks, how many wives does Craster truly have? A curious question, knowing we know all of these wives are, well, his own blood, which is incredibly weird. Very weird. It is like taking some of the Targaryen stuff and amplifying it even worse. Maybe Craster will have some sort of exceptionalism law that he'll pass if he ever, was to live, even though not going to go so well. But I could see Craster being like, I'm such a godly man. I'm such a man above everyone else that I'm allowed to do this, but not everybody else. Taking the Targaryen stuff to the extreme. As we get into page 270, Tywin jokes that Craster has more wives than Gren ever will, as he breeds his own. At this, Ghost suddenly appears beside Jon's horse, not making a sound as he moves so silently that Jon didn't even notice him arriving. Gren's horse shies away. Again, a lot of these horses still are not used to the direwolf's scent. Jon moves his horse forward towards Craster's keep, with Ghost following close behind. Jon had imagined more of a fortified structure, some sort of outpost, but in reality he finds a crude settlement with a midden heap, a pigsty, and a simple daub and wattle house. And he finds a very simple hall. The hall is a long, low structure made of logs and sod, standing on a small rise with an eroded earthen dike for defense. A murky brook runs nearby, swollen with rain. The entrance to the compound is marked by an open gate with a bear's skull and a ram's skull mounted on poles, still bearing bits of flesh. And this is, to me, something that's very interesting. Because, again, Craster's Keep is fairly poor, especially by Westerosi standards. And 2, it's very lightly defended. There is really no defense at all. I mean, a couple bandits could easily take over this keep within a matter of couple minutes. And so it makes you really question how someone like this has survived in the harshness of the North, something that Jon will soon find out. Inside, scouts and vanguard men are struggling to set up horse lines and tents in the muddy yard. Pigs root in the sty, and a small naked girl pulls carrots from a garden in the rain. Two women are tying up a pig for slaughter, its squeals piercing the air, causing Chet's hounds to bark wildly in response. Some of Craster's dogs bark back, but at the sight of Ghost, some flee while others growl and beg. Again, just kind of establishing the direwolves are kind of the alpha of a lot of these dogs and things like that. Something we'll really see more specifically in book 5, with, like, for instance, like Varamir and Bran and a lot of that plot line. But it really just kind of shows Ghost as being more of this physical presence. Jon observes that only 30 to 50 men will fit inside the hall, forcing most of the company to remain outside in the cold. This is something that's going to turn a lot of men against people like Jeor Mormont, or the leaders. All the leaders, the high officials, they're going to be sleeping nicely, and here's everybody else, staying out in the rain, once again, and freezing their butts off. Dolorous Ed is tending to Lord Mormont's horse when Jon dismounts, as Ed informs Jon that the Lord Commander is inside and has summoned him. He jokes that Ghost looks hungry enough to eat one of Craster's children, but admits that he himself would do the same if the child were served hot. This is going to get very interesting, because when we do get to where you have the Night's Watch and they're more desperate, fleeing the Fist of the First Men, cannibalism will be something that is going to peter into their mind, right? When they have no food left, they're starving. This is the only thing you have between life and death. Some men will break. And you think about Ghost himself, again, this gets noted upon right here. Ghost is also right along with a lot of these men, and they're not eating all that much. Ed offers to take care of Jon's horse and sarcastically laments that he was not invited inside. He flicks away a clump of mud and darkly wonders if the entire hill is made of Craster's excrement, as that gets us into page 271. Jon smiles at Ed's joke and replies that Craster has been there a long time. Ed, unimpressed, tells Jon to go see the old bear. Jon commands Ghost to stay outside as he enters the hall through deer hide flaps. He stoops under the low lintel and finds 24 chief rangers gathered around a central fire pit. The hall does not smell very nicely, as dung and wet dog can be smelled. Now, a lot of this probably is coming from the Night's Watch themselves, right? They haven't really had proper, like, baths or showers or anything like that. Like, yes, the rain is, bearing down on them. That's not comparable. The rain does not count as, like, bathing or something like that. they are not going to smell all that well after sleeping night after night outside. It's not the best conditions. But alongside with that, I could not see somebody like Craster keeping a very nice hall, to be honest. Rain drips through the smoke hole in the roof, adding to the miserable conditions. The hall is a single room with a sleeping loft above, accessible by splintery ladders. Jon recalls his excitement upon leaving the wall, expecting wonders beyond the horizon, exploring the unknown, but in reality, this is the world. It's a bit foul up north. It's a bit, again, uncivilized. It's not the same as south of the wall. Craster sits in the only chair, kind of, again, to show that he is saying that he is above them in a lot of ways, using their desperation against them, something that eventually is why the Night's Watch will kill him. Again, all of these things, all these little plot points that happen in Book 2 massively play off in Book 3. It's why a lot of people love Book 3 in a lot of ways, because every plot line kind of concludes those little things set up by Book 2. And one of the reasons Book 2 is my favorite book is because it does a great job of subtly setting up those things for later on, but also moving the plot forward where we don't really get bogged down in those things. Lord Commander sits on a common bench with his raven on his shoulder, while Jarman Buckwell and Thorin Smallwood stand behind Mormont, dripping wet from the rain. Craster wears a shabby sheepskin jerkin and a cloak of sewn skins, but a heavy gold ring glints on his wrist. He appears powerful despite his age, with gray-white hair, a flat nose, a drooping mouth, and one missing ear. He seems very built, very strong, but at the same time, there are those notable signs of the harshness of the North and age. Jon recalls old Nan's stories of wildlings drinking blood from human skulls, but sees Craster drinking thin yellow beer instead. Craster tells Mormont he hasn't seen Benjen Stark in 3 years and never missed him. Very interesting, right? Given that Benjen just went on arranging, did Benjen not stop here? That's not all that surprising, given the fact that Benjen would not like Craster, and maybe he thinks that he could do without it. So, again, I don't think this is too mysterious, but it is interesting because we'll see that somebody else went to Craster's Keep instead. Black puppies, pigs, and women in ragged deerskins move about, tending the fire and serving beer. Thorin Smallwood mentions that Benjen should have passed through last year. A dog sniffs at Smallwood's leg, and he kicks it away. Mormont explains that Benjen was searching for Sir Waymore Royce, who had vanished with Garrett and Will. That'll get us on page 272, but some very interesting things arise about the journey that happened in the prologue. Again, some background occurs about what actually happened before the prologue of A Game of Thrones, but that'll get us into page 272. Craster recalls Sir Waymore Royce describing him as a young lordling too proud to sleep under his roof, though his wives admired him. He mentions that Garrett claimed they were chasing raiders and had warned against catching them under such an inexperienced leader. Craster notes that Garrett had fewer ears than him due to frostbite, and laughs about hearing that he lost his head at the wall. Again, Craster doesn't seem to take a care for these men. He doesn't really care all that much for them. And you even think about Waymar. Waymar is somebody that, regardless of what we think of him as a person, he is somebody that would find what Craster is doing here appalling, right? He is a lordling. And this stuff that you just don't see in Westeros would be something that where I think Waymar would be very similar to Jon and being like, why do we put up with this? Why do we let this guy live? Right? And that's something that I think that would have been going through Waymar's, mind, whereas Garrett probably would have been taking more of an approach like Mormont, that we need Craster. But this brings up an interesting image for Jon, where Jon, again, go back to Bran's first chapter in A Game of Thrones, he remembers seeing Garrett killed. He remembers the execution done by Ned Stark, the blood on the snow, and the discovery of the direwolf pups with Robb. When asked where Sir Waymar was headed, Craster shrugs, claiming he doesn't concern himself with the movements of the Night's Watch. Now, I think we have two options here. Does Craster know more information about their journey and is withholding it from them? Or does he just not know? I think it's very likely that Sir Waymar would not have told Craster where they were going, so I actually do believe Craster here. But who knows? I mean, he could have sent them on some wild goose chase that got them killed, and he doesn't want to reveal that to Mormont, but who knows? But this is where Craster starts to get a little, he wants more for this information. He's not going to give it out freely. He complains about the lack of southern wine and requests a new axe as he needs to protect his wives. Mormont offers to escort Craster south to the wall for safety, but that's not what Craster wants at all. And it should be made apparent, Craster is the only person they've seen since leaving the wall. Of course, there's something else going on here that Craster doesn't want to go south. The raven cries the wall, spreading its wings behind Mormont. Craster sneers at the offer, insisting that he's a free man and serves no one. Mormont warns of the rising cold winds, but Craster remains defiant, saying his roots are deep. And it's kind of interesting, Mormont is the one talking to Craster about these things when Craster is the one that lives north of the wall. If anyone's going to know about the cold, rising winds and the others, it's Craster. And that's why Craster remains so defiant, because he believes he's safe, because he's offering these sacrifices. He grabs one of his wives and tells her to confirm their contentment. The woman obediently says they are safe under Craster, and says that it is better to die free than live as a slave. And there's that introduction into, it's going to be really a main premise of Jon's story in the next book, but it kind of pops up here. The way that the wildlings believe their culture is that they don't want to have to bow to, kings and follow their laws. They want to be people that are free and able to make their own decisions, and they view a lot of the people that live in Westeros as slaves. And when you think about that for a second and you step back and you go, okay, how much of the common people are treated badly, are treated like slaves? It's an interesting dilemma, right? Because in Westeros, peasants are not slaves. They are not, given that title, but a lot of the ways that they are forced to live, a lot of those things, depending on what point of history you're looking at, again, depending on who the king is, they are treated like slaves in a lot of ways. And so that's something I think it's really fascinating when you have the argument of the wildlings versus Westeros, and especially with Ygritte and Jon, that really drives a lot of their main conflicts between each other, and even Jon's own ideology, which will become very interesting in the next two books that he's in Book 3 and Book 5. Mormont continues explaining that every village they have passed has been abandoned, with no signs of life or even animals. He recounts finding the bodies of Benjen Stark's rangers, who were unnaturally pale, cold, and had wounds that did not bleed, referring to the bodies that Jon had found, or I should specifically say that Ghost found in Book 1, and how those ended up rising up to attack during Jon's storyline in Book 1, where they reanimated and attacked, killing Sir Jeremy Riker and nearly Mormont himself. Mormont concludes that the risen dead retain some memories, but have lost all human mercy. Now, this would, again, to a lot of people, either bring up two different things. One, you would just not believe it. You would not believe Mormont's story. It's a fantasy, whatever. Or the second option would be, this is very shocking to you. You'd be like, oh, wow, that's insane. We've got to do something about that, right? Well, and when we get into page 273, Craster has a different response. Craster dismisses Mormont's story of the reanimated dead, claiming he had no such troubles and that the gods keep him safe. Again, he dismisses it, but he doesn't say, oh yeah, this is just some false story or whatever. It's that he is not worried by those issues. They might exist, but he doesn't really care about that. He's protected. Note the difference in response to somebody like, say, Cersei learning this information, or somebody in the South learning this information. Very different response. Craster insists he knows how to deal with the whites and asks again for a sharp new axe. Craster slaps one of his wives on the leg and orders her to fetch more beer. Jarman Buckwell shifts the conversation to Mance Rayder and his growing army. So again, the next big part that they're worried about, right, is one part of it is what's going on with the others, but the other is what's going on with Mance Rayder and the wildlings. Mormont's raven cries, "King, King," at the mention of Mance, which is interesting, right? Mormont's raven understands already who Mance is. Craster spits into the fire at the title King Beyond the Wall, scoffing at the idea that free folk would want a king. And that's interesting, right? Again, we just got done talking about how the wildlings don't want to bend the knee, they don't want to have to follow somebody's rulership, but here they are as Mance being a king. How different is it? And we know it's very different, the way Mance treats his people and the way he is as a king compared to, say, someone like Joffrey, but it is really weird because it kind of conflicts with the actual values of the wildlings. Now, we know the reason that the wildlings make Mance a king is because they believe in him, because they choose him, not because of, not because of his blood or who, came before him, because of him, the person. Craster reveals that Mance Rayder's forces are responsible for the empty villages, forcing wildlings to abandon their houses. Craster refuses to obey Mance's orders, killed the messenger, and nailed his tongue to the wall as proof. He hints that he could tell the Night's Watch where to find Mance Rayder, but does not offer the information freely. Again, Craster wants a bribe. He's not a full friend of the Watch, but he's willing to comply given certain conditions are met. Craster grudgingly agrees to host Mormont's men for a single night, providing space on the floor and food for only 20 men. Mormont offers to share the Night's Watch supplies, including wine, which Craster hastily accepts, but sternly warns that any man who touches his wives will lose a hand. Thorin, Smallwood, and Mormont acknowledge the rule, though Mormont appears to be displeased. Again, Mormont doesn't want to have to bribe a man like Craster or to give up supplies and things like that, but he has to. This is the whole point of Mormont's mission, is to gain information. Craster then asks if anyone among them draws a map. Jon instantly suggests Samwell Tarly, who, again, he is good at maps and things like that, but Samwell is already nervous of somebody like Mormont. How is he going to be with Craster? That's going to be the interesting part. Mormont instructs Jon to send Sam with quill and parchment after he eats. He also orders Ed Tullet to bring his axe as a guest gift for Craster. Before Jon can leave, Craster eyes him suspiciously and remarks he has the look of a Stark. Again, Craster has been around Benjen Stark enough to know what Starks look like. Mormont introduces Jon as his steward and squire, Jon Snow. Something that instantly is going to get Craster's interest. As we get into page 274, Craster comments on Jon being a bastard, stating that a man should wed a woman before bedding her. Interesting, given the fact that Craster is wedding his own daughters and things like that. Just a weird guy. He dismisses Jon with a wave and orders him to make sure the axe is sharp. As Jon leaves, he nearly collides with Sir Otton Withers at the Deerhide door. Outside, the rain has lessened and the tents are set up throughout the compound. Dolores Ed is feeding the horses and sarcastically questions the wisdom of giving Craster an axe. Agreed. Now, again, I think Ed... Again, you don't want to give somebody like Craster a weapon like that, but what's Craster going to do? Kill one of you in your sleep? I mean, there's 200 of you. There's not really much he can necessarily do, but I agree. I don't love the idea of giving Craster weapons. He cynically suggests that Craster might return the axe by burying it in Mormont's skull, which would be really stupid, and he wouldn't do that, but again, you never know. Craster is a wild card. He may go rogue at some point. Ed jokes they should give Craster all their weapons, making their journey to death even faster. Again, this is, I think, a lot of the sentimentality a lot of men would have. They're marching to their death. He wonders aloud if it rains in hell and suggests that Craster might prefer a hat instead of an axe. Jon informs Ed that Craster also wants wine. Ed sarcastically remarks that if they get Craster drunk, he might only cut off an ear instead of killing them all. Again, you can't kill them all, but I do like that Ed is trying to lighten the mood, I guess. Jon recalls that Thorin Smallwood considers Craster a friend to the Watch, to which Ed just plainly scoffs at the idea that the difference between a wildling friend and an enemy is that friends bury the Watch in secret graves instead of leaving their bodies for scavengers. He questions how long the bear carcass has been nailed to the gate and what might have been there before. Ed reluctantly prepares to enter the hall, reasoning that while Craster will likely murder those inside first, at least they will die dry. Jon laughs at Ed's grim humor and reassures him that they are 200 strong, making Craster unlikely to attempt murder, which Jon is correct. Ed remains unconvinced, morsely commenting on the value of a sharp axe over a maul, recalling a gruesome death he once witnessed. I will say, it would probably be much better to die to a sharp axe, which is just taking your head off in mere moments, to a maul that would just crush you and maybe it wouldn't even kill you on the first blow. Jon then feeds the horses before thinking of his own supper. As he wonders where Sam is, he hears a frightened shout of wolf. Rushing towards the sound, he sees one of Craster's women back against the mud-spattered wall of the keep. She pleads for help, frightened of Ghost, who stands before her with a rabbit in his mouth and another dead rabbit at his feet. Ghost is starving, and Ghost sees food, so he's going to take the food. It's that simple. I would assume a lot of you guys have pets, whether it be a dog, a cat, whatever. When they're hungry, they let you know, and this is Ghost letting Jon know that. Getting into page 275, Jon sees a broken wooden hutch and realizes the direwolf must have been hungry. Obviously, Ghost is not coming back with food ever during the night. He's hungry. The direwolf eats the rabbit, then walks over to Jon. A young woman around 15 or 16 watches them nervously. She is pregnant and has muddy feet. Jon asks if she's one of Craster's daughters, and she responds that she is now a wife. The woman expresses sorrow over the broken hutch and the lost rabbits, as there are no sheep left. This would be very valuable. Again, any food that you can get, especially this far north, is going to be valuable, and so losing it to Jon and Ghost is going to be very disheartening. Jon promises to speak to Lord Mormont to make up for the loss, which he doesn't do, by the way. Jon is a liar. I will point that out. Jon does not bring this up with Mormont ever again, so, Jon, maybe that was not your most classiest act, but Jon is not as, I would say, honorable as he is in the show. He does a couple things that are a little bit questionable sometimes. This is definitely one of the least of those things, but it is something to note. The woman responds to Jon with "milord," but he denies being a lord. Others, including Lark the Sisterman and Chet, arrived after hearing the commotion. Lark mocks Jon, calling him Lord Snow, and Chet makes a cruel remark. Lark threatens the woman, suggesting the wolf might want to eat her unborn child. Jon defends the woman, though, telling them that they are scaring her. Chet mocks Jon further. Again, we're going to know a lot more about this in the prologue to A Storm of Swords, but we know that Chet is not happy with this. He's now being forced to do some of the, I would say, harder work, right? He's not just helping Aemond around now, being able to stay at Castle Black. He had to go on this expedition specifically because of Jon. Jon knows that he is blaming him for the loss of a comfortable position with Maester Aemon, but at this the girl runs away in fear. Lark tries to grab the second rabbit, but Jon's direwolf Ghost gets to it first, causing Lark to fall in the mud. Ghost brings the rabbit to Jon, and Jon scolds the others for scaring the girl. Chet continues to show resentment towards Jon as we get into page 276. Chet insults Jon, calling him the Lord Commander's pet and mocking his direwolf. Probably not a good idea to mock someone with a direwolf. At any point, that direwolf, maybe he loses his control and that direwolf kills you. Just saying. Jon refuses to fight Chet while beyond the wall, keeping his tone calm despite his true feelings. He's gotten better at actually holding his feelings in and not lashing out as much as he did in the first book. They continue to taunt Jon, calling him afraid and all of those things. Jon dismisses Lark's words, telling them he knows all the names, and walks away with Ghost at his side. The rain lightens and Jon contemplates the coming night, which will be dark and cold. But at least he has some dinner. He has a rabbit. Some rangers manage to start a fire and set up shelters while Giant hides inside a hollow tree. Jon asks Giant where Sam is, and Giant directs him to keep going, humorously mentioning Sam's possible need for a tree. Ghost finds Sam under a rock outcrop, feeding ravens, and Sam complains about his soaked feet. Jon suggests Sam dry his feet and offers to find dry wood to start a fire. He shows Sam the rabbit, saying that they will feast. This is probably the best meal that they've had since coming north of the wall. They're going to chow down a little bit. Jon tells Sam he won't be attending Lord Mormont in the hall, but Sam will be mapping for him. Sam seems hesitant about meeting Craster. This is a man you probably would be afraid of, especially if you're, Sam, you don't already have a bunch of courage, but all of that. But Jon does tell him that there will be fire and food, so that is something that's reassuring. Jon gathers dry wood under deadfalls and struggles to start a fire, eventually managing to create a small, warm spot, sheltering it from the rain with his cloak. As we move to page 277, Sam removes his boots, complaining about moss between his toes, but expresses enjoyment about the rabbit despite its blood. Jon prepares the rabbit over the fire, and the smell makes it seem like a feast, drawing envious looks from other rangers. Again, a lot of other rangers are having dried meat or all this other stuff that's not as, savory. We think about a lot with like Dunk and Egg, the stuff he was eating at the poorer moments. Especially you think about the beginning of the first novella. It's kind of what a lot of these men would be eating. Remember, the Night's Watch is not the place that is the most richly, food-wise, right? And so Jon, maybe he did steal this, right? This is blatantly stolen food, but it still tastes pretty good all the same. Ghost watches the cooking rabbit, his eyes glowing red as he sniffs, but Jon reminds him he had already eaten his share. Now, I will say in Ghost's defense, Ghost probably weighs more than Jon at this point, I would assume. Maybe Ghost needs more food than humans do. You ever think about that, Jon? But still, Ghost, I'm going to try to defend you, but Jon's probably in the right. Sam asks about Craster and his keep, and Jon describes Craster's place as a midden heap with a roof and a fire pit, no more, and revealing very poor defenses. After eating, Sam jokingly wishes for a leg of lamb, and Jon reflects on the lack of sheep at Craster's keep. Something that's very interesting. Where are all the sheep going? Where are, the men going? Why are there no men here? And it's all going to kind of slide in together the next morning. Sam wonders how Craster feeds his men, but Jon says he didn't see any, only Craster, his women, and some girls. Jon advises Sam to go to the hall to work on the map, and Sam leaves despite the rain with his quill and parchment. Ghost curls up by the fire to sleep while Jon stretches out beside him, grateful for the warmth, though still wet and cold. And what I find is another benefit to Jon, he has a giant direwolf to keep him, warm in the middle of the night. Think about Ghost. Ghost is like a nice big pillow, or almost like blanket, right? Ghost is going to emit a lot of warmth. So Jon is once again very lucky to have Ghost. Jon hopes that tonight the old bear will find a clue to Uncle Benjen's whereabouts, but that is really not going to be the case. Jon wakes up in the cold morning with his breath misting in the air, aching as he moves, and finds Ghost and the fire are gone. So one thing to point out, I want you to think about this. He's already sleeping on the ground. Now you're sleeping in freezing temperatures. Your body is not going to react to that all that well. I myself, I think the coldest I've probably slept in the middle of the night was the last time we went camping, and the one I'm referring to when we slept on the ground, it was probably in the middle of the night around the 40s, maybe upper 40s, and it was still like really cold, especially in the middle of summer, or I guess I'd say the beginning of summer. I don't know how Jon does it. I mean, sleeping basically with almost no warmth at all, especially when Ghost leaves, your body is not going to be feeling great. He discovers the cloak he had hung over the rock is stiff and frozen. It's basically just ice at this point. Stepping out, Jon finds the forest transformed into a crystal-like landscape with ice on branches, flowers, and even mud puddles. Once again, is this to suggest that the other's presence is closer to Craster's keep, especially with the sacrifices that he does? It's interesting because at no point really is the deep cold up to this point described as being this bad until this chapter. So I do think like there's a couple things that are connecting here. The cold getting worse, the ravens and how they act around Craster's keep. There's a lot to kind of think about here. Jon thinks, though, back to his sisters, imagining Sansa, who would see this as kind of an enchantment, a magic, something in a story, while Arya would just laugh and want to touch everything, explore the cold. This gets us into page 278, as Gilly is wrapped in Sam's cloak, finds Jon, and says Sam sent her. Jon admits that they ate the rabbit and feel quite guilty about it. Again, they basically stole a rabbit. But Gilly mentions Mormont gave Craster a valuable crossbow, and likely this will be a decent trade. Again, I don't think the Mormont giving Craster a crossbow is necessarily in relation to this, but I will say, Jon never brings it up to Mormont. That's all I'm going to say. She asks if Jon is a king's brother, and he explains that he is Ned Stark's bastard and Robb is king in the north. She says that Sam gave her his cloak so no one would question her so that she could sneak to Jon. Obviously, Gilly has something that she wants to tell to Jon, and this is very dire. Jon questions this a little bit, questioning won't Craster be mad or anything like that, but Craster is drunk and asleep from the, again, night's pleasantries last night where the Night's Watch gave him wine. As she slips on ice, Jon catches her. She begs Jon to take her with them when they leave. She offers to be his wife, saying Craster won't miss her. But Jon refuses, right? For one, this is breaking a number of vows. One, the Night's Watch can't have wives and all of that stuff. And two, they're under guest right. It's very interesting that George, once again, is going to bring up violating guest right here. Because Jon, in a lot of ways, has kind of already broken guest right. He stole from Craster and his wife, taking a rabbit. Very interesting that gets brought up here. But obviously this doesn't make any sense. The Watch is going further north, further into danger. This just can't happen. Gilly argues that he was never given guest right, given the fact that he hasn't eaten anything inside of Craster's little keep in there, so that in reality, he wouldn't be breaking guest right. Now, that doesn't get over the fact of the Night's Watch vows, but it is a loophole. She insists she must leave for her baby's sake, which is really weird if you're Jon. Why do you have to leave because of your baby? She introduces herself as Gilly, named after the gilly flower. Jon once again remembers his sister Sansa's advice, and that any time a woman recited their name, call it pretty. It's pretty good advice there from Sansa, as Jon does call Gilly's name pretty. He asks if she is afraid of Craster. Is that what's driving her to want to flee? But getting into page 279, that is not the reason that she wants to leave. It's for her baby, not for herself. And this is where we get the big reveal of the chapter. If the baby is a girl, Craster will marry her off, but if it's a boy, he will give it to the cold gods. This is a massive reveal. Craster is giving sacrifices to the others. Why is, once again, Craster being allowed to live and just keep doing this? She mentions Craster used to offer sheep, but now he has none left, implying he may soon resort to sacrificing other animals. And I think this is interesting, this would, in my opinion, indicate that the others are coming more frequently to get things from Craster, to let him still keep living with his little keep. Because if he was allowed a little bit longer, right, he'd be able to, you would assume, repopulate his animals, having them mate, creating more animals, and it would be a more steady influx of sacrifices. But it doesn't seem that way. It seems like the others are coming more and more frequently. And Jon even puts 2 and 2 together. There are no boys or men in Craster's keep, except for Craster. Why is that? Gilly describes the cold gods as white shadows with bright blue eyes, and Jon recalls his encounter with a white and realizes that Craster has been lying about the others. He has been helping them in most ways. He has problems with them, but not in the same ways that the Night's Watch does. Gilly begs Jon to take her to the wall, but he tells her they are riding north after Mance Rayder and the others, not going south. She asks if they will return, and Jon says it's up to Mormont, not him. Gilly feels defeated by this, running off as her hopes are shattered. And you can completely understand Gilly here. Gilly is seeing that this is the only way that her child will survive. But in reality, there's nothing that Jon can do that can help her. Jon resents both Gilly for asking and Sam for sending her. He feels powerless to help, and that is the truth. The Night's Watch cannot help her at this moment. The morning's beauty is now lost, as this has become quite a dire situation as Jon understands what Craster now has been doing. He prepares for the day, snapping ice off his cloak and gathering his gear. Other men wake and start a fire. The smell of bacon is in the air. Jon relieves himself by a frozen bush, then follows the scent of food. As we get into page 280, Jon joins the brothers around the fire where Hake gives him bread filled with burnt bacon and salt fish. This is a very interesting concoction. I don't know how I feel about bread with salt fish and burnt bacon being your breakfast. It's a strange breakfast. I wonder, what do you guys think about that? You guys think bread? Now, the burnt bacon, I also would not be a fan of. I'm not the biggest fan of bacon already, but in my opinion, burnt bacon would make it even worse. I don't know. This is just, out of all of George R.R. Martin's food descriptions, this one was not one of my favorites. Dywyn boasts about sleeping with 3 of Craster's women, but Gren doubts this a lot, as Dywyn smacks Gren and mocks him for not noticing things, referencing a bear he supposedly missed. Dolorous Ed, in his usual pessimistic manner, claims there's always a bear and tells a grim story about one that killed his brother and wore his teeth. Ed complains about sleeping in the hall, saying the ground was hard, the rushes smelled, and his brothers snored. He mentions dogs slept on him for warmth, but one may have pissed on his cloak, possibly Brown Bernard. Jon decides to check, though, on Lord Mormont after all of this, as he notices the camp is muddy with black brothers packing up, feeding horses, and preparing to move out. Now, I want to kind of reference this back to last chapter. This is only 200 men. Now, equate that to, okay, Renly's camp. It's crazy to really think about the actual magnitude of Renly's army. Jarman Buckwell warns Jon to keep his sword sharp, hinting at possible danger. Entering Craster's hall, Jon finds it dimly lit with torches burning low. Mormont's raven flaps over to perch on Jon's sword hilt and asks for corn. I don't know why. That took me 4 times to read. Wild, but again, this is really interesting because you think about all the theories revolving around Bloodraven or the Three-Eyed Crow manipulating events. What was Jon's advice just before he enters the tent? It's to, keep your hand on your sword. You may need it. What does the raven instantly do? It shows, again, impending danger of not only maybe the others, Craster himself, or the things to come. All of this seems to be warning signs for Jon. Mormont tells Jon to ignore the raven, saying it already has eaten half of his bacon. The old bear is eating breakfast with the officers at Craster's board, where the new gold inlaid axe is being displayed. Craster is passed out in the sleeping lot, while the women are awake and serving. Mormont asks Jon what kind of day it is. Getting into page 281, Jon tells Mormont the rain has stopped, but it's still cold. Mormont plans to ride within the hour and asks if Jon has eaten. Jon has already eaten. We saw that already with the weird food description that we got, but he refuses to eat Craster's food, claiming he already ate with the men. Mormont's raven hops to his shoulder and poops on him, making him grumble. I would love to think that this is actually like Bloodraven pooping on his shoulder, saying, hey, your mission's stupid, go back south, you're gonna get all these men killed. I'd love to think that that's actually what is going on here, but could also just be, birds, they poop. What can you say? Jon finds Sam behind the hall with Gilly, who quickly leaves upon seeing him. Sam looks hurt and admits he told Gilly they would help her. Jon's frustrated by this. Why give her a false sense of hope? We can't help her. And that's right now the truth of things. And I think it's interesting for Sam because Sam understands Gilly, right? He understands what she's feeling. Sam is somebody that once was in a similar position, having an overbearing father like Randall Tarley, being forced to flee to the Night's Watch. The two have a lot in common, between Gilly and Sam Sam understands that, and that's maybe where his newfound courage has come from. Sam guiltily admits he had told her they might take her on the way home, and Jon scolds Sam for his foolishness, pointing out they may not return at all, and Mormont definitely will not allow it. Sam feels ashamed, says he thought he could find a way. Jon is angry and confused, and even walks away, feeling guilty despite knowing helping Gilly is impossible. Jon wants to do the right thing, but he can't. There's no real way or feasible way of doing so. The Night's Watch ride out past the skulls on Craster's Gate, heading north and west, as ice melts around them, creating a soft, dripping sound. They ford a swollen brook, with water reaching the horses' bellies. Ghost swims across, shaking off mud and water, making Mormont's ravens screech. As they ride through the woods, Jon quietly tells Mormont Craster has neither sheep nor sons. This is where Jon is going to broach the issue to Jeor Mormont. What I find is interesting is that Jon doesn't realize that a lot of the men have already come to this rationale. Jon's only been here once. A lot of these men have been here multiple times. They already know what Jon is going to imply. Jon tells Mormont a Winterfell servant once said wildlings lay with the others to birth half-human children. Interesting story as we'll relate this back to the Night's King. We haven't really gotten introduced into that story yet in the book at this point. Where I'm kind of referring to as a Clash of Kings and a Game of Thrones. I know we talk about it much later on, especially in A Storm of Swords. But here, again, still unfamiliar to us, but this is very weird. Humans mating with the others. How does that affect, that child, and how does that work? Mormont dismisses it as a hearth tale and asks if Craster seems less than human. Jon insists Craster then gives his sons to the woods, and Mormont acknowledges it, and even his raven seems to confirm it, saying yes, yes, yes. Mormont reveals all the Rangers know about Craster's sacrifices, but rarely speaks of it. Again, all of these men know what's happening, but they turn a blind eye because they need Craster for survival. What are the ethics behind that? Because yes, if you take out Craster, yes, you're taking out a morally evil, morally corrupt person, all that stuff. But you're also possibly killing men in the future. You're killing the Rangers that will have nowhere to go for shelter and a bit of food. All that's fascinating. It's a really great moral argument. And you even think about what Jon just had to experience. The morally right decision was to help Gilly out of this terrible situation, but he can't. It's the same idea that Mormont is going to present to Jon. Now, whether you think that's right, whether you think that's wrong, that's not really the point here. That's the interesting part of this chapter, and where I think this chapter, albeit I don't think Jon is at his best in this book. I think this is probably his weakest book. I think these are the things that I really like about him, is when we get to these moral complex issues that we have to look at. Jon asks if his uncle knew, and Mormont confirms all the Rangers do. This isn't a secret. This is very common knowledge. Mormont understands Jon wanting to stop Craster and maybe even kill him, but Mormont says if Craster simply wanted to be rid of sons, the Watch could take them and raise them as brothers. It's not about getting rid of sons, it's about more. Instead, the wildlings serve darker gods, and Craster's sons are his offerings. Mormont asks how Jon learned this, and Jon admits it was from his frightened wife. Mormont states the world is full of people who want help, but few who help themselves. Now, I think this is an interesting idea as well. I think to an extent, people have to be willing to help themselves. Whatever you're trying to do in life, you want to actually be able to help yourself, not rely on others. But at the same time, sometimes people need help. And I think that that's okay. And so, whereas I agree to some point of this with Mormont and his rationale, I also disagree with what he's going to say next. He suggests that, if he were in the wives' position, he would use Craster's own axe to kill him. Okay, but again, what would they do after that, right? If they kill Craster, well, Craster's the person that's keeping them alive from the others. We don't know how much, skill they have at hunting or things like that, or surviving on their own, but you would assume they do have a good amount given what we know about from Gilly. But where would they go? They can't really go to the wall. They won't be able to make it, which is why Gilly is asking the help from the Night's Watch. So what can they do? And that's the part of it that I don't think Mormont really thinks about. Yes, they could kill Craster, but it would probably just be them killing themselves as well. Jon thinks of Gilly and her sisters, but doubts that they would ever truly act, which is interesting, given we know that Sam is going to be helped by these women, and so Jon is actually a bit wrong here. These women will be kind of drugged down into desperation, and eventually they will act. Mormont warns that Craster's survival has often meant life or death for Rangers, and Jon recalls his father saying, some men are not worth having as allies. And that's very good advice in my opinion, and I actually agree. I think Craster should be killed. If you want to think about, okay, well, he's keeping a couple, Rangers alive or whatnot, he's also enhancing the army of the dead. He's quite literally paying homage to your biggest enemy. And who knows what Craster is telling the wildlings as well. So Craster is a major liability. But Mormont argues that Craster is not their bannerman, has sworn no vows, and is outside of their laws. I agree from the standpoint of the Night's Watch and the idea that they are not, again, in charge of the wildlings or anything like that, but I also disagree on the terms of they are supposed to guard the realms of men. Is not, again, north of the wall, men? Are there not men there? Is it not their duty to, take Craster out, who's abusing his daughters/wives and is, giving these children to the others to reinforce their armies? Is that not, within those vows? And so, again, I question Mormont's rationale here, even though I understand why he makes the argument. He tells Jon to learn that the Night's Watch cannot fix the world. They have greater battles to fight. I agree, but I disagree. This is something that they could completely control. They can control this wrong that's being done, but they're choosing not to. And that gets us into the last page, 283. Jon acknowledges Mormont's lesson and remembers the Night's Watch has other wars to fight. Mormont is displeased to hear Buckwell said Jon might need his sword soon. As Craster confirmed Mormont's fears, Mance Rayder is gathering wildlings in the Frostfangs, explaining the empty villages. Mance is gathering men. This aligns with the intelligence from Sir Dennis Mallister's captured wildling, but Craster provided the exact location. Now, this is, at this point, let's think about this. What information does the Night's Watch know? Specifically Mormont. They now have two sources that are confirming what Mance Rayder is doing. He's gathering men in the Frostfangs, and what he's going to do with that army, still they don't know exactly, but you can make a very logical guess. They're going to attack the wall. Okay, so that's one part of it you already know. You know that the wildlings are coming south, more than likely, under Mance Rayder with all the power of the wildlings. Okay, check. The second one, the others. You still don't know what they're up to, that you don't know a ton about them, but what you do know is that they are an enemy of yours. You know that they are starting to act more and more. You also know that you probably can't defeat them north of the wall. Alarm bells should be going off. You know the information that you need to know that you can get. you should go home. That's not what Mormont's going to do, though. Jon asks if Mance is forming a city or an army. And Mormont, again, he clarifies it. He knows that they are not going to stay in the Frostfangs. They cannot support that many people for much longer. Mance must be planning to invade the Seven Kingdoms. Even Mormont knows that. Why is Mormont continuing to go north? It makes no sense. I get his rationale, and I think it's arrogance in a lot of ways that he believes with like 300 men, he is going to be able to take out a horde of wildlings. It's not going to happen. And so, again, I really think this is a big smear on Jeor Mormont's legacy because I think he really overcalculates here. Jon recalls past wildling invasions, more like Raymond Redbeard, Bael the Bard, the Horn Lord, Gendel and Gorn, and Yorman with the Horn of Winter. Mormont states all those past leaders failed, but the Watch is much weaker now. Yeah, and given its weakened state, do you think okay, let's go through the options here. The first option is you go and attack them where they know the land better than you do, they have more numbers than you do, or option 2, go home, fight them on your home territory where you have all the defensive advantages over them. They choose option 1. Very stupid in my opinion. Winterfell's lord is dead, and Robb Stark has taken his forces south, leaving little opposition, which is true. They won't be helped by the north, really. I mean, they might, right? If Bran was able to marshal some forces, it's more than what they have now, of course, right? It'll be more than the 300 men they're trying to attack north of the wall, but it won't be the full power of the north. Maybe, if you're lucky, you get 1,000 men from the north to come up to help the wall. Maybe, again, this is another part of it, this is a long time from now. We don't know exactly when Mance Rayder's going to attack the wall, or at least Jeor Mormont doesn't. Robb's war could be over in the next year. Maybe Robb comes north and you do get the aid of the north. So it's just a lot of things that I think Jeor Mormont just doesn't really think all that logically about. Mormont warns that Mance Rayder is no coward and understands the opportunity before him, which he is true. Mance Rayder is very smart. This is the opportune moment to attack. Jon asks what they will do, and Mormont says they must find, fight, and stop Mance. Jon realizes they are only 300 men against the wildling forces and clenches his fists. This is a horrendous decision that Jon realizes probably will result in his death. This is not a battle they can win. Now, that gets us to the end of Jon 3: A Clash of Kings. Now, I will say, I like Jon 3: Clash of Kings. I think there's a lot of interesting moments that get brought up, but it is a chapter that I think just drags on quite a lot. There are moments even in this video where you can see, like, I'm kind of just reading off of my script and just kind of saying what happens in the book because there just isn't much to talk about, right? There's a lot of stuff where Jon's describing the area he's at, or him not even talking or interacting with people, that there's not much for me to comment on. Whereas, like, the last chapter with Catelyn, it's a lot to comment on. There's a lot of different philosophies being shifted around. A lot of awesome characters that are introduced here. There's just not a ton in terms of, okay, conversations that are really deep and all that stuff. Like, there's really interesting plot points that happen, like the reveal of what Craster is actually doing. And, some of the stuff happening in Craster's Keep is interesting, but I really feel like this chapter should have been condensed down. This chapter is about the same length as the last one we just did. And even I could feel that. I could feel that recording the video. I could feel reading it, taking my notes. It's just a weird one because, in my opinion, you go from one of the strongest chapters of the book to, in my opinion, I would say, I mean, not one of the weaker ones, but one of the weaker plot lines of the book. So let me know what you guys think about Jon 3: Clash of Kings, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.